Stop being dramatic, Morgan. Those words cut through the roar of the wind as I screamed into a satellite phone. My 7-year-old son, Noah, convulsing on a school floor 3 hours away. I begged my father to act, to authorize the EpiPen that could save his life, and he sighed, dismissive, focused on something far less important. In that moment, I felt the cold weight of betrayal and asked myself how long had I been feeding people who didn't care if I or my child survived. I didn't scream again. Screaming wastes oxygen, and at 5,000 feet in the middle of a mudslide, oxygen is everything. I yanked the heavy-duty satellite phone from my vest, my hands shaking, but my mind laser-focused. The police couldn't reach us in this weather. A chopper would never make it. So I called the private extraction team I kept on retainer for high-risk geological surveys. The dispatcher hesitated when the wind howled across the receiver, quoting a fee that would bankrupt most people. I didn't flinch. I shouted my AMX black car details over the roar, authorizing the $4,500 charge without hesitation. That was the price of my son's life. Every second mattered. The hours stretched as the team mobilized, and I was left staring at the jagged terrain, each gust of wind threatening to throw me off balance. I thought of Noah alone on the school floor, his small body struggling, and it became painfully clear how little my parents cared. Their vanity, their preoccupation with a cosmetic consultation had blinded them to the real emergency happening in their own family. While I raced against time, they swiped my card to indulge their illusions of perfection. That clarity hit me like a boulder. I would no longer be the daughter who begged, who compromised her own family for theirs. I would stop feeding the rot that had festered for decades. By the time the extraction team reached me, I was coated in mud and grit, looking like I had emerged from the earth itself. The journey down was treacherous each second, a reminder of how close we were to losing Noah. My heart pounded, not just from exertion, but from a cold, precise realization that I couldn't rely on those who were supposed to care. Everything I had been taught about duty and family loyalty crumbled in the harsh wind. I had only one focus: get to my son alive. 3 hours later, I burst into the hospital, still covered in geological dust, the adrenaline slowly fading into a hard, cold clarity. Noah lay stabilized, his small chest rising and falling in a rhythm that tethered me to the world. I sank into the plastic chair beside him, gripping the edge, letting the terror ebb into a quiet, simmering resolve. It wasn't just relief I felt, it was awakening. I would protect him fiercely and without compromise, and I would never again let appearances, vanity, or family expectations stand between life and what truly mattered. I studied root rot for years, but never imagined I'd see it reflected in my own family. On the surface, my parents looked vibrant, sharp suits, bright smiles, a home that glittered with their curated success. But beneath it all, the foundations were blackening, rotting from decades of selfishness and greed. I realized in a sudden piercing clarity that I had been their invisible support, the nutrient-rich soil keeping their leaves green while they drained me dry. I paid bills, covered debts, ensured their world didn't collapse, all while they mocked the very work that made me the backbone of their survival. They called me Mud Girl, sneering at my career in soil science, never recognizing that the dirt they despised was the only reason they weren't bankrupt, the hidden strength beneath their pretense. Sitting in the hospital beside Noah, watching the slow, steady rise and fall of his small chest, I felt the weight of every betrayal pressing down. Then my phone buzzed a fraud alert. $5,000 charged for a Beverly Hills aesthetics appointment, timed exactly while I'd been fighting for my son's life. The stark contrast left me numb. While I risked everything for the person who mattered most, they swiped my card to indulge vanity blind to any real consequence. My heart wrenched at the realization that their care, if it existed at all, was conditional, performative, and utterly hollow. It was in that juxtaposition, Noah, alive and safe, and the proof of my parents' disregard blinking on my screen, that the metaphor of root rot crystallized. I had been the soil sustaining them, quietly absorbing the decay. And now, seeing the fraud alert, I understood I couldn't continue feeding this rot. I couldn't let their corruption poison my life or my child's future any longer. I traced my gaze from my son's peaceful face to the screen, the green numbers glowing against the dim hospital light, and felt an easy resolve settle in my chest. The same clarity that guided me through the mudslide now grounded me here. No more silent sacrifices, no more invisible labor to keep their illusion alive. It wasn't just betrayal, it was the end of a cycle. I had been the source of life for a family blind to gratitude, and I would no longer allow myself to be the foundation for their decay. Something had to give, and that something would be me finally standing unyielding for myself and for Noah. They never understood what I did, and honestly, they never tried. To them, dirt was just dirt, mud beneath fingernails, the playground of a failed daughter who couldn't marry a banker. But in that soil, I had built a world they couldn't even imagine. I finished my PhD in mayology, developed a patented fungal-resistant soil treatment that transformed vineyards in Napa and wheat farms across Oregon, and quietly became the backbone of an industry they dismissed as insignificant. Every time a major farm applied the treatment, I got paid. Not a fortune flaunted in flashy cars or designer labels, but real wealth, quietly compounding, powerful and invisible to those blinded by appearances. For years, I funneled that success back into their lives without them knowing it. They chased veneers, nose jobs, country club memberships, the illusion of prestige, while I kept the foundations intact. When their adjustable rate mortgage threatened to swallow their house, I didn't just bail them out. I bought their debt through a blind trust, setting up a financial safety net that kept their world spinning without them ever realizing who was pulling the strings. They celebrated the illusion, oblivious to the fact that their stability rested on my strategy, my foresight, my quiet work, while they flaunted the result. It was almost comical in a bitter sort of way how oblivious they were. My boots, my 10-year-old truck, my modest home, they saw failure even as the system I built around them prevented actual ruin. The irony wasn't lost on me. They measured success by what could be seen, and in doing so, they completely missed the real power quietly at their disposal. I lived in their shadow, or rather, I built the shadow they thought was their own, shaping a financial ecosystem that allowed them to strut. And yet none of it would have existed without my labor, intelligence, and patience. Sitting back, reflecting on the intricate web I wove around them, pride mingled with a bitter amusement. They spent decades pretending to be successful, while I quietly ensured that pretense didn't collapse into disaster. They never thanked me. They never understood. And in that ignorance lay a dangerous confidence that would soon be tested. For the first time, I realized that invisible control is its own form of power, and the careful, strategic way I had managed their finances had set the stage for the reckoning that would change everything. That night in the hospital, while Noah slept and the machines hummed quietly beside his bed, I made a decision that felt less like revenge and more like pruning. In nature, rot spreads if you keep feeding it. The only way to save the tree is to cut precisely where the decay begins. So I made one phone call, not to family, not to lawyers. I called Marcus. Marcus manages the face of my private investment portfolio. Hard money lending, short-term commercial loans, the kind that look like opportunity to someone desperate to look successful. He answered on the first ring. Calm, professional. "Dr. Morgan," he said, "everything all right?" "No," I told him quietly. "It's time to execute the contingency plan on the Gregory asset." There was a pause on the line. Marcus knew exactly what that meant. For years, he'd watched me quietly keep my parents afloat through blind trusts and indirect debt purchases. He knew the careful balancing act I'd been performing, protecting them without letting them know it was me. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Once we initiate the bridge loan offer, there's no reversing it." "I'm sure." Then I laid out the parameters. $280,000. Attractive interest, fast approval, just enough paperwork to make it look legitimate, just enough restrictions to make it dangerous in the wrong hands. And I knew exactly whose hands those were. Greed is predictable. Arrogance even more so. Marcus sent the offer 2 days later, and like gravity, my father fell straight into it. He called me that evening, his voice bursting with pride. "Morgan," he said, practically laughing, "you'll never believe the deal I just closed." I leaned back in my chair and let him talk. According to him, a private equity group had recognized the brilliance of his consulting firm. They'd offered him a huge capital infusion, $280,000. Investors desperate to put their money somewhere smart. He actually believed it. That's the blind spot of a narcissist. They can't imagine a world where they aren't the smartest person in the room. "So what are you gonna do with the money?" I asked. He laughed. "Invest it, of course. You have to project success. Clients won't hire someone who looks broke." Then he started explaining his plan like he was teaching a master class in finance. He'd written a check to my uncle's construction company for a foundation project. The company would cash it, keep a small fee, and return the rest of the money in cash. A clever workaround, he said. Leverage. What he didn't realize was that he was calmly confessing to laundering loan funds through a shell company. He said it proudly. Then he mentioned the Porsche, a brand new black Panamera he'd bought that morning. Paid in cash. I asked one last question. "Did you read the loan terms carefully?" He scoffed. "Please, Morgan, maybe if you spent less time playing in the dirt, you'd understand real finance." I let him finish. I let him feel brilliant, untouchable. Then I ended the call. He thought he had just outsmarted a lender. What he had actually done was hand me a signed confession. Within hours, Marcus confirmed everything. The Porsche purchase, the cash transfers, even a photo my father proudly sent to the loan officer showing the title. Evidence, gift wrapped by his own ego. The trap wasn't complicated, it never needed to be. All it required was one thing my father had always supplied in abundance, his certainty that he was smarter than everyone else. After the loan was accepted and the funds misused, I watched events unfold with a quiet patience that only comes from knowing the system and anticipating human greed. My parents, flush with arrogance and convinced of their own cleverness, acted exactly as expected. The confession of judgment clause I had embedded in the commercial bridge loan ensured that any violation of terms would automatically acknowledge liability. They had signed away their protection, unaware that their every move was now documented, recorded, and irrevocable. I waited until they were comfortably ensconced in the country club, basking in the validation they craved. At precisely 12:30 in the afternoon, I confirmed with Marcus that the Porsche was registered and the title in hand. My father had sent a photo to the loan officer, practically celebrating the evidence of his own wrongdoing. The confession of judgment was executed seamlessly. Within minutes, the deed to the property was recorded under my LLC, and a process server was dispatched to deliver the eviction notice. I didn't need to witness it to imagine the scene: Gregory leaning against his new Porsche, showing it off to friends, smug with the illusion of control. Then the envelope was handed to him. He read it. He realized that his house and car were no longer his. 24 hours to vacate. I pictured the shock, the disbelief, the first moments of panic as the certainty he had always relied upon crumbled beneath him. They didn't apologize. They didn't pack. They reacted as cornered narcissists always do, with attack and entitlement. 3 days later, a lawsuit arrived. A strip mall attorney specialized in predatory lending claimed the loan terms were unconscionable, that they'd been tricked, and alleged emotional distress worth millions. My broker's voice carried the tension of the unknown. They expected fear, compliance, capitulation. They expected me to retreat to the girl who had been silenced for decades. But that girl was gone. I instructed the broker to demand full discovery, every invoice and receipt for their so-called capital improvements. 2 weeks later, the documents arrived. My forensic accountant, Sarah, needed 5 minutes to expose the fraud. The construction company existed only on paper. The invoices were fabricated. The tax ID belonged to a defunct dry cleaner in Nevada. Wire fraud, federal. Evidence compiled, verified, and ready. I delivered everything to the FBI. Agents raided their home, seized records, froze accounts, and impounded the car. Gregory wasn't immediately arrested, but hours later he collapsed in rage at the hospital while screaming at his lawyer. Insurance canceled. Accounts frozen. They had nothing, and they knew it. I didn't intervene. I didn't negotiate. I simply observed, calm, methodical, and empowered. The trap closed with the precision of nature's own law, leaving the rot exposed and the foundations of deceit dismantled. The satisfaction wasn't in punishment alone, but in reclaiming agency and watching a system. I understood better than they ever could reveal the truth with impartial, unrelenting clarity. 6 months later, the house was sold at auction. I didn't keep a penny for myself. Instead, I established an agricultural scholarship for first-generation soil science students, those who, like me, had been discouraged or dismissed by their families. Watching that program grow felt like planting seeds in fertile, grateful soil, knowing the next generation could thrive where I had once struggled. Noah is thriving too. Our weekends are spent in vineyards, hands deep in the living earth, testing soil and observing growth. He understands now what safety boundaries and resilience mean. He knows we don't visit his grandparents anymore, and he doesn't resent it. Together, we cultivate life knowledge and patience in the only soil that truly matters. Standing among dormant vines, one cold morning, hands in the earth, I remembered the first lesson nature ever taught me. Rot must be cut away before anything healthy can grow. That lesson applies to family, to life, to ourselves. I had pruned away decades of decay. Finally, free to nurture what deserved care and attention. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. It was the quiet satisfaction of boundaries, honored of harm acknowledged and of growth restored. That night back at home, I opened the spreadsheet where I had tracked every dollar, every insult, every slight for more than 3 decades. I deleted it. One by one, the numbers vanished, leaving behind only quiet clarity. The act wasn't symbolic, it was necessary. It was the final severing of ties that had once bound me to misery. The reclamation of my life and my energy for what truly mattered. I had cut the rot, and now the soil beneath my feet was fertile once more. Reflecting on the journey from the mudslide to the quiet moments beside Noah, I feel a profound sense of closure. I survived betrayal, manipulated greed, and systemic deception. Not through force or vengeance alone, but through strategy, patience, and the understanding that power lies not in appearances, but in quiet competence and the courage to act when the moment demands it. My son sleeps safely. My legacy supports those who will honor it. And I have finally claimed the peace that comes from standing unwavering in the face of rot. If you've ever had to prune your own family tree to protect yourself or those you love, you are not alone. The earth and the people who matter will grow stronger because of it. Stories like this leave a mark, don't they? Moments when loyalty, trust, and family collide with betrayal and awakening. Take a moment to think about the rot in your own life and what boundaries you might need to set. If this story resonates with you, share your thoughts or experiences in the comments. There's a quiet power in reflection and in knowing that others have faced and survived the same struggles. Your insight could spark someone else's courage